With nearly 60 million ballots cast, more than a third of the total expected vote, Republicans are showing unprecedented early turnouts, both in person and by mail. While Democrats have started to slowly bounce back, the question remains, should the Harris campaign be concerned? NBC News has a helpful tool tracking early voting, and as of now, 41% of ballots have been cast by registered Democrats, 40% by Republicans, and 19% by independents or third-party voters. This shows that early and absentee voting is significantly less polarized than in 2020. Trump and the Republican Party's active encouragement of early voting this cycle marks a notable shift from 2020. A key factor here are the high propensity voters, those who are highly engaged and vote consistently. For the first time in modern history, these voters are leaning more Republican, and we may see Republicans outvote Democrats when all is said and done for the first time in most of our lifetimes. This dynamic suggests that Trump could feasibly lose the independent vote by a few points and still stay competitive, both in the national popular vote and in the crucial race for 270 electoral votes. With that in mind, let's dive into the Electoral College map, analyzing early vote data alongside polling and demographic trends to get a clearer picture of where things currently stand. To keep things moving, I'll skip a detailed analysis of every safe state for each candidate. For former President Trump, early vote data suggests that, as expected, Republicans should dominate in the following states: Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, and Alaska. Across the Great Plains, we have North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska statewide, along with the 1st and 3rd districts, Kansas, and Oklahoma. In the South, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, and South Carolina are all showing their traditionally strong Republican support, while in Appalachia, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Indiana round out the list. Each of these states supported Trump by significant margins in 2020 and have not voted blue since at least 2008. The early voting numbers already show Republicans jumping out to massive advantages in every single one of these states, leading by margins of around 15 to 40 points. Together, they account for 125 electoral votes. Now, as for Kamala Harris, Democrats hold strong early leads in several deep blue states as well. Down the Pacific coast, we have Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii. Moving east, Colorado and Illinois stand as the only solidly blue non-coastal states, while the rest of these Democratic strongholds are in the Northeast: New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. Joe Biden carried each of these states by at least 15 points in 2020, and they haven't voted for a Republican in almost 40 years. Again, as expected, Democrats are jumping out to massive leads in the early vote here by very, very wide margins. Together, these states bring Kamala Harris up to 190 electoral votes, leaving 17 states still undecided. However, most of these remaining states aren't truly in play for either candidate. Trump is expected to hold Iowa and Ohio, which he carried by 8 points in both 2016 and 2020. Similarly, he should retain Maine's 2nd congressional district, one of the whitest, most rural, and oldest districts in the country, which may lean even further right this cycle. As for Kamala Harris, she should easily hold New Mexico. Notably, the 2020 cycle marked the first time since 1968 that New Mexico voted to the right of neighboring Colorado as it backed Biden by 11 points, as compared to 13.5 in Colorado. I expect to see them diverge even further this cycle, as while Colorado is one of the fastest left-trending states in the nation, New Mexico is a sleeper future swing state as the most Hispanic state in the nation. The Hispanic vote has generally trended to the right in recent cycles, and that trend is expected to continue here. Still, I have New Mexico in the likely blue column for now. Harris is also heavily favored up in Maine. The statewide contest is likely blue, while the 1st district is solid. Maine voted for Biden by 9 points in 2020, and the polls show her leading by at least that much here in 2024. That brings us down to just 12 remaining states, together worth 191 electoral votes. These are the battlegrounds that will likely decide the election. Starting with Nevada, the early vote numbers here have drawn more attention than any other state this cycle. At this point, we'd typically be discussing the Democratic firewall and whether Republicans could close the gap on Election Day. However, with over 850,000 ballots already cast, about 60% of the total 2020 turnout, Republicans are currently outvoting Democrats by 4 points, with 39% of returned ballots Republican and 35% Democratic. This gap has narrowed slightly in recent days, but remains the most concerning trend for the Harris campaign so far. Back in 2020, the final early vote tally in Nevada, totaling 1.3 million votes, favored Democrats by 4 points, which allowed for Biden to hold Nevada in the Democratic column by 2.4%. However, Nevada has shown a gradual Republican shift relative to national trends. In 2020, Biden held Nevada by the same 2.4% margin as Hillary Clinton in 2016, despite winning the national popular vote by a wider margin. And in 2022, Republicans capitalized on this trend by flipping the governor's office. Current polling has Harris leading Trump by the absolute narrowest of margins, literally by 0.1%. According to the 538 poll average, in a race this close, Democrats will need to hope they can chip away at the Republican early vote advantage over the next week. Without doing so, Trump could be on track to overperform not only in Nevada, but potentially across other battlegrounds as well. For now, Nevada lands in the tilt Republican column, with Trump holding a slight edge. Moving on to Arizona, another highly competitive race in the Southwest. In 2020, Arizona was the second closest state by margin, with Biden carrying it by just 0.3%. His victory can be attributed to the rapid growth and diversification of Maricopa County, encompassing the Phoenix metro area. High turnout among Hispanics and college-educated voters ever so narrowly tipped the county, and thereby the state at large, into the Democratic column. Now, early vote numbers indicate Republicans are on track for a strong showing here again, leading Democrats by 8 points among the 1.7 million mail-in and early in-person votes cast, currently at 42% Republican to 34% Democrat. This marks a 2-point pro-Republican shift since our last update, comparing this to the 2020 election, where Republicans led Democrats by only 3 points, 38% to 35% out of the 2.8 million early ballots returned. We see Republicans overperforming that number by 5 points now. This shift is significant, as given Biden's slim 0.3% margin of victory in 2020, any Democratic slippage in Arizona could prove fatal for the party. Polling data also supports this trend, with Trump currently leading Harris by 2.2% in the 538 average. Notably, Arizona has been the one core battleground state where Trump has consistently polled even with or ahead of Harris since Biden exited the race. Similarly, prediction markets have consistently given Trump the edge here in Arizona, where he's currently at minus 300, which roughly translates to about a 75% chance of winning, or 3 in 4 odds. For what it's worth, the odds also now favor Trump down here in Nevada as well, at minus 205. These odds reflect the trend of current public sentiment. They create a kind of collective wisdom because participants are motivated to be right, not just to blindly support a candidate. I'll leave a link down below for you to check them out at Bet Online. But back on our map, we'll place Arizona in the tilt Republican column. Barring dramatic improvement in Democratic early vote turnout, Trump is favored to carry both states, wrapping up the Southwest with Texas, the second largest electoral prize on the map, worth 40 votes. After a week of early voting, more than 7 million ballots have been cast in Texas, more than any other state so far. Republicans continue to hold a solid edge here, although the margin has narrowed down to just 14 points now, with 51% of ballots cast by registered Republicans compared to 37% for Democrats. Again, looking back to 2020, when Trump won Texas by just 5.6%, the narrowest Republican margin in Texas this century. The early and absentee vote leaned Republican by 17 points with over 9.5 million ballots cast. So, if anything, Democrats are the ones overperforming at this point with about 2/3 of the total vote already in. That said, the poll numbers suggest Trump is on track to overperform his 2020 margin, currently leading Harris by more than 7 points here in the running average. As Hispanic voters continue to trend Republican, it's increasingly likely that Democrats hit their ceiling in Texas in 2020 and may struggle to improve on that performance this cycle. So based on these factors, we're going to place Texas in the lean Republican category. Alrighty, now shifting over to the southeast here in Florida, another state where the first few days of early voting have produced a substantial tally of more than 6 million ballots returned. Here, Republicans lead by a solid 10-point margin, accounting for 44% of the vote compared to Democrats' 34%. This is yet another concerning sign for Kamala Harris, as in 2020, when Trump carried Florida by 3.5 points, Democrats actually led the final early vote tally by 1 point with over 9 million votes cast. The Florida Democratic Party has struggled in recent years, with Republicans registering far more voters since 2020. Florida has shifted sharply to the right since then as well, highlighted by the localized red wave of 2022 when Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio were reelected by landslides, each winning by more than 15 points. Now, in 2024, polling suggests Trump may win Florida by the widest margin seen for a presidential candidate in decades. Given these trends, Florida joins Texas in the lean Republican category on our map. Next, we have Georgia, the closest state in 2020, where Joe Biden flipped the peach state blue for the first time in 30 years, winning by just 0.2%. Biden's win here was largely due to the rapid growth and diversification of Atlanta, where high turnout among black voters tipped the state ever so slightly in his favor. One key trend this cycle is the potential for racial depolarization, with black and Hispanic voters showing an increasing shift toward Trump. Recent polling crosstabs from mid-October to the end of the month show Trump up by over 20 points among black voters compared to 2020, which could pose a significant challenge for Democrats in Georgia, where they rely on high turnout and substantial margins among black voters. Early voting in Georgia is also setting records, with around 3.5 million ballots already cast either by mail or in person, and Republicans currently leading by 3 points, 48% to 45%. This gap has narrowed slightly, but it's worth noting that in 2020, Republicans outnumbered Democrats by 8 points in early voting out of 4 million ballots. While Democratic numbers could still be inflated due to the initial surge of mail-in ballots, which generally lean most Democratic, Georgia is shaping up as one of the Harris campaign's stronger battlegrounds in the early vote at this point. For now, Georgia remains in the tilt Republican category on our map, though we'll continue to watch these numbers closely over the next week. Now moving up the southeast coast to North Carolina, Democrats need to build a solid early voting lead here, as rural Republican-dominated areas are expected to swing hard for Trump on Election Day. So far, however, Democrats are once again underperforming, trailing Republicans by a point among the 3.3 million ballots cast so far. Back in 2020, Democrats built a firewall of 5 points over Republicans headed into Election Day among roughly 4.5 million ballots, but Trump ultimately won the state by more than a point. So again, Democrats are currently underperforming their 2020 numbers in a state where they need high turnout to have a shot. Trump leads Harris by 1.1% right now in the 538 average, so North Carolina will join other Sunbelt states in the tilt Republican category on our map. That lifts Trump's electoral vote tally up to 268, too shy of the magic number with 6 states to go. Let's turn to the Midwest, starting with Harris's running mate Tim Walz's home state of Minnesota. In 2020, Joe Biden carried Minnesota by a 7-point margin, with Democrats leading the early vote by 13%. Today, with nearly 1 million ballots returned, Democrats lead Republicans by 23 points. This lead has slightly narrowed over the last few days, as the first waves of mail-in votes have given way to early in-person ballots. Still, on our electoral map, we'll place Minnesota comfortably in the lean category for Harris and Walz. Now we can focus in on the core Upper Rust Belt trio, the WIMPA states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which will again play a decisive role in this race. These states have voted together in every election since 1988, backing Democrats every time until they narrowly flipped to Trump in 2016 by less than a point, giving him the necessary votes to reach 270. However, they all flipped back to Biden in 2020, securing his path to the presidency. Now again, for the 2024 election, both candidates' paths to 270 likely hinge on winning at least one of these states. For Kamala Harris, she might need all three. Even if Trump were to sweep the 4 Sunbelt battlegrounds like he does here, Harris could still reach 270 electoral votes with a clean sweep of the Rust Belt states. Starting with Wisconsin, it's generally seen as the most Republican-leaning state among the upper Midwest trio, both demographically and structurally. Wisconsin has consistently leaned right of Michigan and Pennsylvania in recent cycles, with its whiter, more rural population making it especially responsive to Trump's appeal among white working-class voters. In both 2016 and 2020, Trump notably outperformed the final polling averages here by significant margins, trailing Clinton by around 6.5 points, but winning by 0.7%. And in 2020, Biden's lead narrowed to the same 0.7% margin in the final results. Currently, Harris holds a narrow lead by that same 0.7%, according to the 538 poll average. On the early voting front, the Democratic advantage has been narrowing as in-person early voting has progressed. With over 1 million ballots already cast, Democrats currently lead Republicans by 11 points. Yet back in 2020, Republicans outpaced Democrats by 8 points in the nearly 2 million early votes, so it'll be important to see if they can repeat or even exceed that turnout this cycle. One key early trend, however, is that minority turnout is generally down across the board, while college-educated white voters are voting at an extremely high rate. This could play to Harris's favor in Wisconsin, which is the whitest of the core battleground states. For now, Wisconsin remains a pure toss-up on the map. Michigan tells a different story, where I've been more optimistic about Harris's chances compared to the general outlook. Michigan is fundamentally the bluest of the 3 WIMPA states. Biden won it by nearly 3 points in 2020, and Democrats have shown strong performance in down-ballot races since then. According to the latest 538 polling average, Harris holds her largest lead among core battlegrounds here at exactly 1%. Nearly 2.5 million early votes have already been cast, with Democrats holding a 5-point lead, 47% to 42%, a significant drop from the 14-point advantage noted in our last update. However, in 2020, when Biden won Michigan by 2.8%, Republicans actually outnumbered Democrats by 2 points among the 3.2 million early and mail-in votes. Given these indicators, I'm placing Michigan in the tilt Democrat column for Harris. Finally, in Pennsylvania, we have the ultimate battleground state, worth 19 electoral votes. Nate Silver's latest forecast emphasizes its importance, giving Pennsylvania a 34% chance of tipping the election either way. Both Harris and Trump's odds of reaching 270 electoral votes soar to around 90% if they can carry this state. Currently, the polling average shows Trump ahead by a slim margin of 0.4%, and neither candidate has led by more than a point since early September. Pennsylvania is as purple as it gets, truly a 50-50 battleground. Early voting data shows that 1.6 million ballots have been returned. Since Pennsylvania doesn't have traditional early voting, voters must request mail-in ballots in person at their county clerk's office. These ballots were expected to lean Democratic, and so far, 58% are from registered Democrats versus 32% from Republicans, for a margin of D plus 26. However, Democrats' lead is much smaller than it was in 2020, where they ultimately held a 31-point advantage among 2.5 million votes of this type. 65% to 24%. At this point, 4 years ago, Democrats had a raw vote lead of around 1 million votes. Today, it's closer to half that. This trend suggests that Republicans may ultimately outvote Democrats in the total return rate once all ballots are counted. Considering this shift, I'm moving Pennsylvania into the tilt Republican category, which now raises Trump's projected total to 287 electoral votes on the map. That leaves us with the more Democratic-leaning secondary battlegrounds, Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District, Virginia, and New Hampshire. Starting in Virginia, where 13 electoral votes, nearly 2 million ballots have been returned, and Democrats maintain a clear advantage at 50% to 39% for a D+11 margin. Virginia voted for Biden by 10 points in 2020, the largest Democratic margin since FDR in 1944, with early voting making up more than half of the total votes in 2020 and leaning Democratic by 8 points. Democrats are on a strong track here, even accounting for the early inflation of mail-in ballots. I'll place Virginia in the likely blue column for Harris. Next, we have New Hampshire. Hillary Clinton narrowly held off Trump by less than half a point here in 2016, but the state swung sharply to Biden in 2020, giving him a 7-point win. Early voting here is minimal, with only about 60,000 ballots cast favoring Democrats by 5 points. This sample is small, so there isn't much to extrapolate, but the 538 poll average shows Harris leading Trump by more than 5 points. Given these indicators, New Hampshire will stay in the lean blue column. Lastly, Nebraska and Maine split their electoral votes, with 2 going to the statewide winner and 1 per congressional district. While we don't have district-specific early vote data, Nebraska's 2nd district, which surrounds Omaha, is predominantly urban, racially diverse, and has a high proportion of college graduates. It voted for Biden by 6.5 points and is likely to trend further left this cycle. For now, I'm placing Nebraska's 2nd district in the likely blue category for Harris. So, based on an analysis of the early votes so far, Donald Trump is on track to win the election with 287 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 241, and 10 votes in Wisconsin placed in the toss-up category. We continue to trend towards an extraordinarily close final outcome. Make sure to subscribe to my channel below for more updates as we get closer to Election Day. That does it for today's video, though. Shout out to my channel members in the description below. Make sure to subscribe to my channel down below, and please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. You can check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.